One of the things which we did in the previous step is to implement the delete course details request. We saw that when I send a request with ID 2, it's coming as 0. So 1 stood for success and 0 stood for failure. And this is the kind of design which makes it very difficult for customers to understand our services. Our services should be very specific. Instead of sending 0, I would actually be good if I send in success or failure and clearly define that in our XSDs. So that's what we would do. I mean, this is an important thing. While it might look very simple from the perspective of a developer, this is something which is very important in terms of establishing a good contract, good service contract between the service provider and the service consumer. The more things we make obvious for the service consumer, the better it is for the provider, because there will be so many less mistakes while consuming the services. In this step, let's try and make this a enum. So we'll define a list of values for the status, and also we would process it on the server side. So let's start as always with the XSD. So right now we define this by a comment, right? So that's not a good way. So let's create a new type. So I'll say access colon simple type, and I would want to create a simple type with the name status. I would want to put a restriction. So what is the restriction? I would want to define the base type of the status. The base type I will use is string. Let's still keep it a string. However, we'll define the values for the string inside. And the restriction that we are going to use is an enumeration. So what are the sub values that I would want to add? So success, and I would want to have failure. Now I've defined a status. Now I would need to make this status use this. So the namespace is no longer access. Oops, kill this guy. And namespace I would need to use is similar to the earlier ones, right? So it should be TNS, target namespace, which is the one which we are using. So since status is defined in our XSD, it's going to be using TNS status. So now I have defined the status as a string with success and failure. And I will do the same thing on the service side as well. So I'll create a public enum status, and I would have two values in there, success comma failure. I actually had a capital E, it should be small e. So public enum status, success and failure. And what we want to do in the case of a success scenario, we would want to return what? Oops, where is the method? Here it is. So return, this is success, right? So status dot success, and here what we want to return? Status dot failure. And I would do a control 1 or command 1 and change the method status to status. So I would want to return a status back. The endpoint compilation would fail because now there are a few things which have changed. So I would make the delete ID method, change the status to status. So we are now using status. We would want to be able to set the status. So the status here, which we are getting from the service, is of the type course details dot status. However, the status here with the set status method uses a different status. This is actually from the XSD Java object. So in XSD, we have com in 28 minutes courses. That's where this status is defined. So what I would want to be able to do is to map this status, this status class to the other status class which is defined in the bean. So what I'll do is I'll create a map status method. So map status, and I'll say status. And this would give me a compilation error. So control 1 or command 1 and say create status. You can see that this status is mapping from status which is in here. So from the enum to the bean, which is created by our binding framework, JAXB framework. So if status dot, I'll say if status is equal to status dot failure, then return from the bean. So I'm picking up from the bean dot failure. What we are actually doing here is we are taking the status from the enum which we have defined, and we are mapping it to the enum which is defined in the map. Over here I can say success. The confusion arises because the status, the name of status, the class name is the same. So there are two classes with the same name, right? So now there's a enum status with the same name, as well as you have a status within the JAX-B or the Java API for XML bean. So there is a enum which is also defined in here. That is really resulting in the confusion. And when we are creating web services, this kind of confusions often exist, because how you define something in your WSDL or the XSD will be the same way you would create names in the bean definitions as well. So there is always a conflict. One of the ways you can actually solve this is by kind of having naming conventions. So probably in your beans, always call them beans. So instead of having status, probably call this status bean or something of that kind. So all the things which are in the bean class, what you can do is you can actually, instead of course, you can call it course bean, and status bean, so that you are sure whether you're using the course from the WSDL or the course from your beans. Okay, so now enough discussion, enough theory. Let's get back to the practical stuff and let's get started with I'm running the server. Let's see what would happen. Cool, the server has started up, and now I can go ahead and go to the request. I'll send the request again, and you'd see now that the return status is success. This is much more clearer to the client, right? Instead of saying 1 or 0, if you return say success, that is very, very clear to them. And now if you execute, try to delete it again, it would result in a failure. And also, if you look at the WSDL for that, it would be much more clearer. So when we are saying status, and we are saying status, it's success and failure. That's much more easier for the consumer. If you have a clearer contract, that makes things a lot easier for your consumer. In this step, we made our contract much more clearer to the consumer. We defined an enum for status, and we used it for all our services. Actually, we used it for the delete service. Until the next step, bye.